Boxing Asylum listeners, here we are with another interview today, taking a different look at the sport. Here I am with sports psychologist Sean Ryder. And Sean, tell us, how did you get into working with fighters as a psychologist?
Yeah, it was quite interesting, really. I'm a big believer in working in sports that you have at least a passion for, but also some sense of knowledge. So while I was never a fighter myself, I'd sort of done training, got as far as sort of full sparring and so on. So it really gave me just a little bit of insight into the mentality of boxers. I think also you ask any boxer or any trainer about how important the mental side is to their performance, and you'll get a pretty high percentage compared to the physical side. So they're a special breed, boxers. There's absolutely no doubt about that. So I find them fascinating characters, and the mental side is so important. So that was really what started me working with fighters and trainers, of course.
And I've heard from, different fighters, different trainers, that sometimes there's guys that have everything in the gym, and for some reason in the ring, that just doesn't transfer through. What have you found in your work that separates the fighter from the gym from the fighter in the ring?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the problem you have with bad trainers is that they have one way of training, so that they look at the way that they were trained, perhaps as fighters, and they go along with that and try and instill that into their fighters, which is fine. Everybody needs a philosophy and so on, but you've got to be flexible to the needs of that particular fighter. What's probably best, I can give you an example of a fighter I worked with who had exactly that same problem. The trainer was telling me they were absolutely stunning in sparring, but when it actually came to fight night, then they either sort of clammed up or they just went totally off the game plan, stood up and just had a tear up. So we started to talk about what it was about the whole atmosphere about fighting in front of an audience that might be causing them to sort of lose a bit of control. And it's difficult. Not many people know exactly what it is that's caused them not to be able to do that. So we set up a spar. I got a load of the fighters' friends to come and watch the spar, and we got it videoed. And so just for the first couple of rounds, I was just standing at the other side of the gym with the fighters' friends and just allowed them to go into their proper spar as planned. Then between rounds 2 and 3, we took his friends, got them to stand right at ringside, and just watched the next 2 rounds in silence, just to sort of see the boxer's response to that. And then between rounds 4 and 5, the friends had been told that actually once rounds 5 and 6 come on, they can just give dog's abuse to the fighter, to their friend, and I don't know if I think their friend, the boxer's friends, were pretty much like mine. They were pretty enjoying that, They relished that. They gave him all sorts of abuse. And then after the 6th round, we sort of changed the situation a little bit and said to the fighter, these guys are your friends now. They've traveled hundreds of miles to come and see you fight. They've had all the expense of travel and hotels and tickets and so on. They really want to see you put on a show. And so we did another couple of rounds with that as a background. After those 8 rounds, the boxer went and got changed, had a shower, just sort of relaxed a little bit. And then we just went through the video again with the trainer, with the boxer, just trying to understand how he was feeling, what difference the different sort of support or the hostile atmosphere had on him. And what we found was actually the more hostile atmosphere was something that really inspired him. He felt even more control, wanted to put on a show, but not too much that he lost control. But it was actually more the time when he had friends there. He felt the pressure on him to perform, that people had spent their hard-earned money to come and watch him. And that made him sort of get caught out that he wanted to sort of have a tear up and sort of put on a show rather than sticking to the game plan. So it's really just trying to find out what is the particular issue for each boxer and then working on it.
So essentially, I mean, when you go about these things, though, you're almost using the scientific method. I mean, you got your control with the sparring, and then you keep adding variables until you seem to be able to pinpoint what exactly it is that throws them off.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I mean, I always look at it to try and take some of the to try and demystify what I do a little bit. Is I just go through a process to say that the same way that any trainer would go through with a new boxer that comes into his gym. First of all, you'd find a baseline. You'd see what the boxer can do and what he perhaps needs to improve on. Then you'd produce a program to work on the areas he needs to improve on, but also to build on those strengths. And then you do it. So it's exactly the same thing. So in that example I gave you there, is one of the areas he needed to work on was actually coping with the positive support that he got from his friends and family, and being able to transfer his performance into the ring. And so what we then did was we sort of repeated during sessions of sparring sessions, pad sessions, that there were friends and family watching there. I also worked with him on some mental imagery, mental rehearsal work, on him imagining him putting on a controlled performance, blocking out that support that he was getting, and just being able to transfer that performance from the gym into the ring.
And I mean, we talk about these fighters that I mean, that they're lacking something mentally initially. But what do you think it is that separates fighters like Floyd Mayweather and Andre Ward, and even Vladimir Klitschko, who is able to rebound and become a mentally strong fighter? What is it that you think separates them so much from the rest of the pack?
Well, it's interesting. I hear a lot of people tell me that, fighters, they've either got it or they haven't. They're either mentally tough or they're not. And to be honest, that's just not quite right. And I hear that quite a lot because people often haven't been exposed to mental performance coaches, sports psychologists, and the actual practical things that they can do to help. Everybody starts with a sort of specific level. So there's, people will have a natural physical genetic makeup. People will have, a natural ability to sort of deliver various technical skills. And it's the same with the mental side. Now, the point about the technical skills is that you can improve your technical skills with consistent practice and training. And it's exactly the same with the mental side. So I think the top fighters, one or two things happen. They either have a very natural aptitude to the mental side initially, and they build on that, or they're doing something about it. They're probably have a pretty good standard to start with, but they're also specifically training. And you look at the Klitschkos, they take a pretty scientific approach to all aspects of their training. So I'm not surprised that people sort of see them as being boring and one-dimensional and so on, because everything's planned out. They've decided exactly what they want to achieve. They've rehearsed it time and time again. They will have rehearsed it in their mind time and time again, probably in a structured way in terms of, this is my mental rehearsal session on a Wednesday from 2 till 4, and done it in such a specific scientific way so that when fight night comes, it's just second nature to deliver the plan.
Well, both of those guys were young and they fully grew up in those Soviet sports schools. So do you think that, taking from that a little bit, do you think that as, you look forward to building amateur programs that ultimately transfer over sometimes to professional status, do you think that there might be a lack of mental training for fighters as they're coming up and developing?
Do you know what the interesting thing, and it's in most professional sports, particularly in the UK, is that there's actually so much more mental skills training at the youth and amateur level than there is in the professional game, which is kind of counterintuitive. I mean, if you look at Great Britain boxing, the amateur program there, then they have at least 2 sports psychologists who work with the guys on a consistent basis. So at sort of youth level and amateur level, it's becoming more acceptable. I mean, the problem boxing has is this sort of perspective that if you even talk about the mental side, then it's seen as somehow mental weakness. And you're taught over years and years and years to not show any sign of particularly mental weakness. I mean, physical weakness is bad enough, but to show mental weakness is a real cardinal sin. And as a result, people are scared to even sort of talk about developing the mental side for fear of appearing mentally weak. I'll give you another example. I was working with a boxer, and we were chatting away about this and that. We tend to meet once every fortnight and just have a little bit of a talk about how the practical things we've decided to do between sessions have gone and so on. And we were talking, and he was saying, it was just a throwaway comment. He goes, "Do you know, I wish my trainer wouldn't stand so close to me in between rounds." And so I was asking more what he meant, and he said, well, he said, particularly after I've had a tough round, my trainer sort of looms all over me, and he's right in my face, and he's talking, and all I can think about is just get out of my face, you know, and I'm not listening to what he's saying to help me prepare for the next round, and I've got all of the emotions of having a tough round just gone, and I think it's going to be a tough round ahead, and I've got this figure sort of standing over me, and I'm just not taking the information on board. So what we then did, we just had a chat between the three of us. The next spar, we decided to make it as realistic as possible. So instead of just standing up in the corners between rounds, we got a stool, and he was sat down, and we just got the trainer to just take a little half a step back and just to go down on one knee. And it was incredible, just the way that the boxer was able to just relax, get into a state to take on the information, so that he was ready to go again for the next round and not spend that 60 seconds just thinking, just get out of my face, just get out of my face.
Well, and every trainer seems to have different methods for how they approach their fighter. We fondly refer to Virgil Hunter on the pod as the fight whisperer. What do you think of his corner methods?
Yeah. Do you know, it's interesting. I mean, the key thing, and the greatest trainers are the ones that treat all of their boxers as individuals and understand what they need, and more importantly, what they need at what time. So if you take it very sort of broadly about, you know, give somebody the carrot or the stick, you'll have the individuals who respond more favorably to sort of the arm around the shoulder, and others that will respond more favorably to, you know, being told what for. But the problem is sometimes even the same fighter will need a different response at different times. So personally, I quite enjoy Virgil Hunter's style. I think it's very calm, because as we all know, you can't fight angry. You know, it's all about delivering the game plan, and if you can deliver that in a calm, relaxed, structured manner, then the boxer's going to take that on board. You know, that they have to be calm, relaxed, and just looking to deliver the game plan. One thing about Virgil Hunter I find quite strange, though, is actually between rounds he's almost constantly shouting out to the fighter, and I think that kind of sort of goes against how I sort of see him in between rounds. But, you know, it's important that trainers use their own personalities and not try and be another sort of trainer. They've got to use their own personalities, but understand when that personality works for them with the boxer, and then when it perhaps doesn't, and then they have to change at those moments.
You know, and as I kind of explored that in my mind, I start thinking that it seems like certain gyms fit mentalities better. You know, it seems like a lot of the fighters that Hunter has, you know, he tries to go that same Ward route and calm, and he has kind of that mellow demeanor a lot. But then you go down into like the Garcia gym down there, and all those fighters are rough and tumble. They're loud, they're crude, they're aggressive. So do you think that in an era where there's so much access to being able to see trainers and the way they go about it, that fighters can actually make a decision on who they should go with, who they can connect with, by the way that they see others getting trained in the gym?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. I mean, it doesn't, if you think about it, it's not surprising that similar sort of fighters come out of similar sort of gyms, because what will tend to happen, to take Angel Garcia, for example, he's got that sort of, that attitude, that sort of very sort of in-your-face kind of personality. Well, imagine a boxer that comes into his gym who perhaps doesn't respond well to that, who perhaps needs to be calmed down so they don't get over anxious, they don't get drawn into fights. Well, that mixture just isn't going to work, and so as a result, that fighter is likely to leave the Garcia environment, and so all the people that are left in that environment will be the ones that respond to that particular style, and it'll be the same with a Virgil Hunter environment. Somebody who needs to actually be motivated to be really sort of increase their arousal levels to go out and fight, they're probably not going to get the best out of somebody who's speaking to them in quite a calm, controlled manner. So you kind of end up with the fighters that suit your personality. But the problem is you've wasted a lot of time with fighters that don't suit your particular style if you're not able to change your style to meet them, you know?
Absolutely. And taking just moving in a little different direction, we've talked about, in the corner, what should happen, a little during fights, but what happens to a fighter after the fight? Let's use Ricky Hatton as an example, where for whatever reason, a loss just completely destroys their psyche. How do you go in and handle something like that?
Yeah, do you know what? I think it's one of those. It's one of those things. Sadly, when I first started in this field, I had all these sort of really worthy ideas that I was going to get people who were really mentally tough coming to me, and we were going to make them even more mentally tough, and it was going to be fantastic. But what actually happens in the real world is that people don't come to me until often they've tried everything. They've tried sort of sorting things out themselves. They've tried the sort of they get somewhat depressed after a defeat, so they try alcohol to numb the pain, drugs to numb the pain, eating to numb the pain, all those sort of things. All the things that mean that they've kind of lost their identity a little bit, because all that build up to that big fight, they're absolutely convincing themselves that they are a boxer, they are a world title boxer, and that they're going to come away as world champion. And then when they're not, then there becomes a bit of a conflict into, their identity as, who are they? They've been knocked out in 2 rounds, and they're not the man that they thought they were. And then that can lead into sort of depressive spirals. The way that I work is we try and preempt that. So we go through the life cycle of a camp and a fight and post-fight, and identify on an individual basis with the boxer what are their trigger points to low mood. Now some people it might be, particularly those that don't earn a full-time career boxing. You've had all of that exposure, you've had that great adrenaline rush on the Saturday night. You might be going back into work in a job you don't enjoy, that you're only doing to get money to allow you to sort of train and actually compete. And that can be one of the depressive triggers. You might have people who are trying to cut weight for a fight, and they hit that weight loss plateau. They're eating what they think that they should be eating. They're working out in the way they should be working out, but the weight's just not coming up. And that can cause really, really low mood. And again, it's how you deal with that. Do you deal with that in a positive way? Relook at your nutrition, relook at your training schedule, make sure what you're doing is the right thing, and that will come off. Or do you think, oh no, I'm going to have to just cut all my nutrition, or I'm going to have to ramp up the cardio, which means that your training gets out of sync, or even worse, you decide, I'm fed up of this, I'm just going to go on a binge, which again causes you problems. So we try and find on an individual basis with the boxers, and this is something they can do themselves. They don't need to hire me for this, to be really honest and think, when do they get real low moods during the life cycle of a boxer? And then the next thing is, what am I going to do to deal with it? Because you always have options in how you deal with things, and you either deal with them in a way that will help you, or deal with them in a way that won't.
Now, there seems to be something about the really top boxers and, just generally, the sport, is that they seem to relish the regularity of the gym, getting in there. And it almost seems like it transfers over into an addictive personality, because you look, a lot of fighters just can't step away from the ring. And then when they do, they find themselves with the drink and with the drugs. Do you think that something mentally with boxing, it provides for those with an addictive personality, but it can be a blessing and a curse?
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about it, we're talking about elite athletes here, and if you look across elite athletes across all sports, the number of stories of people who have problems upon retirement are just for everybody to see in all the papers. I think boxing is a specific case as well. I think it's more of a perfect storm, in so much as you mentioned the regularity of the gym. You've got your structure. You know what you've got to do, what days you're in. You've got your morning runs, you've got your technical sessions, you've got sparring, you know what you're eating, you know what you're drinking. You're also taught from a really young age, again, not to show any mental weakness. So that is something that's built up over many years as well. You have that adrenaline rush of fight night. You have that feeling of being someone. You have that identity of, I'm a boxer, and all of those positive things that you associate with being a boxer, being strong, being a man, all of those sort of positive things. And then actually when it comes to retirement, suddenly you're not a boxer. You're an ex-boxer. You don't have that routine. You don't have that sort of discipline. And then again, you have choices at that point. You have choices. Do you make a decision to keep a routine, going to the gym, stay fit, stay healthy, start to move on to another part of your life? It could be coaching, it could be something completely outside of boxing, but having a plan. It could be media work, it could be anything. Or do you just let circumstances take over you and just think, well, I've got all this time, what shall I do? I'll just go to the pub, I'll spend some time with friends and we'll relive the old days and so on, but you're still not getting that buzz. And so that's why I think boxers, particularly struggle. When I work with athletes, particularly those coming to the end of their career, I always try and we always start to get a plan of what are they going to do after boxing, or what are they going to do after any sport that we're doing. There used to be a sort of an old-fashioned attitude that you didn't talk about retirement until it happened, for fear of losing motivation or actually bringing on that end of the career more quickly. But what I've found with athletes is actually, if you start to develop a plan after boxing or after your professional career, then it takes away some of that doubt, some of that hidden angst that could be gnawing away at you, and people actually enjoy the last couple of years of their career more. And if they're enjoying it more, they tend to put more into it, which means they perform better, which means they enjoy it more, and that elongates their career even further. Plus, of course, when that career does come to the end, they've been spending 2 or 3 years thinking about what they were going to do when they have to retire, developing skills to help them transfer into the media or training or whatever it may be much more smoothly. But the problem is, they'll always say, and you say to any elite athletes, about the buzz of the fight and how you don't get that back. And you know what? It's true. But you've got to find something that does give you a buzz, but not in a way that competes against, your previous life as a boxer.
And looking at fighters, a couple examples, Danny Williams, Roy Jones Jr., 2 guys that, shouldn't be fighting anymore. They've been knocked out concussively more than one occasion. Do you think that without that preparation for the end of their career, do you think that boxing is essentially I'm trying to think how to explain it. It's as dangerous as any drug they can get into if they don't find a way to manage it properly?
Yeah, absolutely, because you're getting repeatedly punched in the head. I mean, it's I don't want to be flippant about it, but it's a dangerous sport, and if you're not in the right condition, be it physically or mentally, then you're going to get hurt, and you're going to get hurt on a more regular basis, which is going to have that sort of negative spiral. But the problem is you've got to retire sometime. I mean, you can't still be fighting, apart from maybe Hopkins, who might still be going at 65, but, you've got to retire at some time. And so I would say to even the guys who are still fighting now, who perhaps shouldn't be, you've really got to make a concerted effort to think, what are you going to do after boxing? And actually use people. There are people out there who can help. This isn't an advert for my services, but there are experts out there that do help people transition out of sport, but still maintain that link to the sport that they love.
And you work with boxers, and I know you told me that you work with football players as well. What do you think it is that makes boxers a different breed from other athletes?
Well, it's just the fact that you need such mental strength to go in there, into a ring, one man against another man. There is absolutely no hiding place, and it's similar with other individual sports. But there is something particularly special and primal about boxing and other sort of combat sports like that. And what I find fascinating is that each individual has a different reason for boxing, and it could be from wanting to make better of themselves, coming at the old stereotype of coming out of poverty and making a great career for themselves through the business of boxing and so on. But there'll be others that are just so in love with the science of it, and I know sweet science is used far too much in my opinion, but there's something in it. They want to be the best that they possibly can be, and so I think if you want to be the best that you can possibly be while somebody is trying to cause you physical harm, then you're a pretty special character.
Absolutely. And so when you look at, times when, they say fighters quit in the ring, um, what are your thoughts on that after having an opportunity to talk to so many different fighters and the way that the public seems to almost expect them to accept death before quitting?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, there are a lot of brave people that have never been inside of a ring. It's quite. I mean, I know just from my time of full sparring, it's a frightening place. Even though you're in quite a supportive atmosphere, and you kind of know that if you're in trouble, then people won't take liberties. Um, what are the expectations? I prefer to look at the boxers themselves and spend time with them and understand what was going on at that particular time, because there's often a reason why somebody's perceived to be quitting in the ring. And I'll give you a perfect example. I spoke to a boxer. I didn't work with him, but we had quite a real honest conversation. But it took me about 4 years to get this out of him. He was an outstanding prospect, but a really poor trainer, really, really terrible trainer. Would do just about the minimum to get through a fight. And
Frankie Gavin?
No,
Just
no, it wasn't. I mean, that's the other thing. I'm sure we'll get onto confidentiality, but that's a bit of a problem that
oh yeah,
has. But he really sort of he just didn't put the effort in. Would really sort of struggle with his weight, and then would have to really cut late, and then that would affect his performance. And it took a long time of sort of on and off knowing him and chats and that sort of stuff until finally he admitted to me one day. He said, do you know why I know I'm not putting everything into every training session. And he goes, it's because what if I put everything into all of my training sessions, all my camp, and I still lose? I have no excuse at that point. And it was almost hiding behind this fact that actually he knew he was talented. He could beat the people that he was up against, most of them, but he was only going to get to a certain level. But it was that defense mechanism that he could always say if he got beaten, well, if I'd done this, then if I'd put the work in, then I would have, then I could have beaten that guy. And it was actually that fear of putting everything in, putting his whole soul into training and having no excuses and then coming out and losing. And I thought that was a really fascinating insight. And there may be people listening to this that sort of chimes with. I'm sure there are quite a lot of people that just cannot comprehend that at all. And the fact is that doesn't matter whether people comprehend it or not. It was real to him. And it shows the difference between the boxers, I mean, we then did a little bit of sort of work. I mean, to say that we did any extensive work is pushing it too much. But we started to sort of talk about what he would feel like if he'd done all of the training. And because he'd never done that much training, he wasn't sure. And we started to talk about, that feeling he would get standing in front of, waiting for the bell to go, knowing he was in the best shape he'd ever been in, knowing that he was technically better than he'd ever been. And all of that development to his confidence would give him a better chance of winning. And, it was something that he took away. And, but yeah, that just gives you an idea of some of the things that could be stopping fighters from delivering your ability.
Hearing that though, I mean, I was just thinking when you're saying that, like they just feel like there's a certain level. It gives me a certain respect for a guy like a Derry Matthews, who, he's never going to be able to win a world title or anything like that, but he has really fun competitive fights at the domestic level. He can get his lightweight belt there and everything, but he seems to accept where his place is, and he just enjoys putting on good fights, and he makes a solid living. He's come to terms that he'll never be a world champion, but not that he can't make a living as a boxer.
Yeah, absolutely, and the best way is to love the process. Love the process of the camp. Love the conditioning of the first phase. Love the improvement on the pads and the bags technically. Love taking that into sparring and showing how you've improved physically and technically in a sort of fight simulation environment. And then loving loving taking that into the ring and showing the product of all of that hard work that you've done. And the thing is, I think I heard Michael Jordan make some sort of comment about, you never know how great you can be until after it's done. And you know what? Take somebody like Derry Matthews. I mean, his last couple of performances have been. I mean, it was a really good performance against Curtis Woodhouse, and that comeback
out of the dark against Coyle.
Yeah, absolutely. Would have just given him so much more motivation to carry on. And you know what? You never know what matches can be made in the future. Circumstances could appear that he does get a world title shot, and then you know what? All of these years of drills and pad work and bad work and early morning runs and all of that sort of stuff, it comes into that one shot. So it's the great thing about boxing. You never know how close you are away from a shot, whatever that means. You might be sort of fighting at sort of Southern area title level, that sort of bit, and you never know whether a British title or a European title or something like that might just sort of come up, and then that's your equivalent of a world title shot.
Well, and part of that, I mean, sticking on Matthews, I mean, part of the mental strength I see from him, too, is there doesn't seem to be any insecurity as a fighter. On that Coyle fight, he happily said during the interview that there was no good reason that he should have won that fight. And do you think that a big part of accepting being a professional fighter is just simply learning how to accept a loss?
Yeah. It's actually sort of slightly different to that in my view. It's actually thinking, do you know what? I'm going to do everything I can in preparation to put on the best performance that I possibly can on the night. And, I'll do everything I can to influence the fight so that I win. But actually, I know if I've done everything right in advance, I've prepared physically, technically, tactically, mentally, that I'm ready to go. I remember a conversation I had with an Olympic gold medalist from the London Olympics last year, and she told me ahead of the final, she had never been so relaxed before any race in her life. The point being that she knew over a 4-year cycle, she had done absolutely everything to make herself the very best that she could be. And you know what? If somebody else outdid her in that race, there wasn't really much that she could do about it, and she would be able to cope with that. I mean, a lot of the problems the boxers have is, if we go back to the guy who perhaps didn't train so much, the ones that actually do put all that effort in and then lose and struggle to come to terms with the fact that they've lost, the guys that know they've put everything in, as disappointing as that is, they do tend to bounce back a lot quicker because they've focused everything on themselves, on what they can do to make themselves the best version of themselves that they can be.
It's funny because as a big Ricky Hatton fan, my mind keeps circulating back to a lot of the things you've said there, and it seems like Ricky mentally had believed that he was the best in the world, but when he realized that he just wasn't, it was like everything went from there, and that just being loved wasn't enough, that he felt like he let everyone down because he felt he had that absolute greatness in him. Do you think that sometimes fighters just need to have it broken to them in no uncertain terms that they have a certain level, and they can work harder and everything like that, but that there has to be terms of acceptance, basically, that you can't beat Floyd Mayweather if you're at the top. I mean, it's because it's such an exact, specific example. I'm sorry to put you on there, Sean.
No. I totally get what you're saying. I mean, from my perspective, I wouldn't want to limit the sort of the dreams and the goals of any athlete that I'm working with. But by the same token, you can only be the very best version of yourself. And again, it comes back to the process of doing the work day in, day out, leaving no stone unturned. I heard a fantastic story from Joe Gallagher talking about Scott Quigg when they went over to California to just do a training camp out there. And they were in Los Angeles and they'd had an end of a session and everybody was saying, right, come on, let's go out and sort of hit LA. And Scott Quigg apparently said, no, I'm just going to stay in the apartment. And when asked why he was doing that, he said, well, do you know what? The more world title fights I have, the more times I'm going to have staying in towns, in cities, bored out of my mind because I can't go out and party. I'm just training, and I just want to train myself for that. I want to train myself to be bored and to see what I would do when I'm bored. So that actually when it comes to preparing for a fight, when that boredom hits, I know exactly what I'm going to do to help me to deliver my best possible performance on the night. And again, so I constantly try and bring all athletes back to their level of performance. Now, you can't say to somebody, don't ever think about winning, because that's just ridiculous when it comes to elite and professional sport. But if you can get them to recognize that what gives them the best possible chance of winning, then they can start to focus on the process that needs to get them there. And then actually winning becomes, it doesn't become an added pressure. It becomes a privilege to have that pressure because you know you've done everything and you know that you're going to put on a good performance. And then actually, if you find that your level is just beneath that, against that top of the world fighter, there are other routes that you can go now if winning a world title is important to you.
It's interesting. It seems like, I mean, there's a lot of compare and contrast that you can make. It's just, and it's all different how people handle things mentally. Like, Naz got beaten. He came back one more time, and he just didn't have the fire anymore. And he was able to let it go and other than his weight, maintain himself basically. And then Hatton is completely different. Do you think? And it seems like Naz prepared himself in a different way. Do you think a fighter like him that it was just that he found himself in a position at the end where he could happily walk away because he knew he was situated for the pretty much the remainder of his life, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult when you talk at sort of the elite level fighters who make significant amounts of money that can often sort of set them up for the rest of their lives. But you're talking about such a small proportion of those guys, and it is a little bit easier if you don't have any sort of financial worries, or at least not many, to sort of get you through. It's more difficult at the sort of level below if you've got people who are not earning enough to set themselves up because they have that sort of, what am I going to do now perspective. It often comes down to what do people expect from the sport? What do they want from the sport? What do they love about the sport? So you often find people who they just want to go out on top. Their legacy is important to them. You think of somebody very like Joe Calzaghe, for example, who wanted to go out at the top. He could have carried on for many years now, and I'm sure, if the offers come in quite frequently to fight Hopkins again, perhaps. But so the opportunities come back, but it's understanding your reasons for coming back. And the problem is money talks, and it's very, very tempting to give it one more go, particularly if legacy wasn't, the biggest thing in your life. You saw it much more as a business, which, obviously quite a huge percentage of the people inside boxing recognize the business side of it.
And Sean, I've got one more question for you before we close out, and then make sure we get your contact information out there, because give some of the fighters that listen a chance to get a hold of you. But just a fun little question for you. And for me, I'm thinking myself, if I was a trained sports psychologist, I would have wanted Ike Ibeabuchi. But what fighter in history would you have liked to have gotten a hold of before they went off the rails? Because you thought that had they fixed that mental aspect, what they would have done in the ring would have been incredible.
Wow. Do you know what? There are a few British fighters currently now that I really would like to work with, but I'm certainly not going to say their names on this show, because there are a few really talented guys who don't deliver their ability for whatever reason. When it comes to sort of people who've it's a tough one. It's a tough one, Matty, because without knowing the individuals, I kind of don't know the ones that I could have really helped. The ones that have gone off the rails, it's interesting. I predominantly deal with getting people to perform at their peak. I'm not a clinical psychologist who works with people with depression and addictions and so on and so forth. So I'm always very sort of sad when I see people have spiraled into these sort of mental illnesses and addictions and so on. Do you know what? I'm going to have to get back to you on somebody who I think perhaps just didn't deliver their ability due to some sort of mental weakness. Because, yeah, it's also, I don't think it's quite fair, particularly if they're still alive listening to this, you know?
Yeah, the two guys that I look at that I'm like, if they could have fixed that mental aspect, they could have, gone on to further greatness or been great. For me, the two that keep popping in my head is Mike Tyson and Ike Ibeabuchi.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, you look particularly at Mike Tyson and his relationship with Cus D'Amato, and I mean, I don't believe for 1 second that Mike Tyson had any mental skills training or sports psychology involvement during his career. Um, but you don't have to be have a master's degree or a PhD in sports psychology to be able to work on the mental side of people. And with somebody like Mike Tyson, Cus D'Amato obviously spent many years cultivating that relationship, cultivating that trust, putting those disciplined boundaries in place to allow him to become the very best that he could be for that particular time. And it also shows that it's an ongoing process. So you can't just come in and do some work on the mental side for one sort of camp and then suddenly think that that's going to be great for the rest of your career, because your circumstances change. So I think Tyson's a perfect example of how he could have elongated his level of greatness. It's funny. I run a workshop on the psychology of boxing, and one of the sections is on mind games and that sort of winning the fight before the fight's won. And there's like I've got a nice little montage of some of Tyson's head-to-heads, and it really sort of gives an idea of somebody who is totally in control of themselves and forcing their will on the other fighter. So I think that's a fascinating aspect to it.
Absolutely, and I know there's plenty of other, psych tricks in the game that we could talk about, but we'll have to do that another time. But I'm looking forward to it, Sean. This was an absolutely great interview. I enjoyed it a lot. Everyone, you can follow Sean. What's your Twitter handle? Sean at Sean Ryder DYA, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. SEANRYDER and then DYA.
And for the fighters, what's the best way to contact you? Should they hear this and say, "Man, those are the kind of services that I'm really needing"?
Yeah, sure. So all of my contact details you can find on my website, which is www.deliveryourability.com. And one thing that's really key to point out is that it's also great when I get an opportunity to work with trainers as well, because that relationship between trainer and fighter is absolutely key. And so when I get an opportunity to help the trainer and the fighter in exactly the same way as a strength and conditioning guy does or a physio does, then that's when you really do get the greatest level of benefit.
Fantastic. Well, Sean, we appreciate you coming on here, and we will definitely be in touch again. The fans are going to love this.
Terrific. Absolute pleasure. Really great to speak to you, Matty.
Cool. Thank you, Sean.
No worries.